The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Peter approached Jesus and asked him, "Lord, if my brother sins against me, how often must I forgive? As many as 7 times?" Jesus answered, "I say to you, not 7 times, but 77 times. That is why the kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who decided to settle accounts with his servants. When he began the accounting, a debtor was brought before him who owed him a huge amount. Since he had no way of paying it back, his master ordered him to be sold, along with his wife, his children, and all his property, in payment of the debt. At that, the servant fell down, did him homage, and said, 'Be patient with me, and I will pay you back in full.' Moved with compassion, the master of that servant let him go and forgave him the loan. When that servant had left, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him a much smaller amount. He seized him and started to choke him, demanding, 'Pay back what you owe.' Falling to his knees, his fellow servant begged him, 'Be patient with me, and I will pay you back.' But he refused. Instead, he had the fellow servant put in prison until he paid back the debt. Now, when his fellow servants saw what had happened, they were deeply disturbed and went to their master and reported the whole affair. His master summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked servant, I forgave you your entire debt because you begged me to. Should you not have had pity on your fellow servant, as I had pity on you?' Then in anger, his master handed him over to the torturers until he should pay back the whole debt. So will my heavenly Father do to you, unless each of you forgives your brother from your heart." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. The Gospel today is couched in this question that Peter has. Must I forgive? Now there's a little bit more around it, but that's essentially what he's getting at, right? How often must I forgive my brother? As many as 7 times. What he's really saying is, Jesus, I don't want to forgive people anymore. And I think we can all connect to that, right? That there's people in our lives that either kind of continually are some sort of offense or annoyance, or they cause pain or whatever. And we don't want to constantly do the work of forgiveness. We tire of it. All right, Lord, how often do I have to do this? Which is also saying that we'd really rather, part of us would really rather stay angry. That we just want to be able to be allowed to hold on to the grudge and kind of enjoy the energy that comes with that. Right? It's really negative energy, but it's still, anger is a kind of energizing thing. That's why sometimes you see guys go and they want to break something, or they go and they work their anger out at the gym. That's a pretty healthy response. You also see people who get angry and they get violent, right? There's this physical kind of energy that comes with it. But it actually winds up zapping you of like the kind of life-giving energy of love. Sirach asks the question, right? Who in their right mind could nourish anger and expect the Lord to bring them healing? Anger is like a kind of invasive plant that if we let it grow in the soil of our hearts, not just let it grow, but actually nourish it, it'll grow out of control and it'll kind of take over that internal ecosystem That's bad news for our interior selves. We're not called to nourish anger, but we're also not immune to it. It's okay to feel anger. It's at the end of the day, it's an emotion, and you're gonna feel it if you have a pulse. That's okay. But we have to kind of process that emotion with some interior, spiritual, psychological maturity, some emotional maturity. We have to bring it to the Lord and kind of sort it out with Him. All of our emotions have some meaning behind them. They're trying to tell us something about ourselves, trying to tell us something about the world that we're living in, how we're experiencing it. Emotions aren't bad. We got to process through it. We got to digest them. But if we nourish anger, it's going to take over. We cling to anger like that, it leads to hatred. If we're talking about a God who is love, if we're talking about a God who is merciful, then God certainly isn't hateful. He certainly isn't going to be the result of unprocessed anger, or anger that we respond impulsively to, or anger that we bury in our hearts. Somehow along the way we've gotten tricked into believing that holding on to the anger will keep me safe. It'll keep me from being hurt next time. It'll give me a stronger defense against my enemy who's done something to make my life more difficult. But the truth is, it's that invasive kind of anger that stays with us and starts to slowly harden our hearts and make us hateful people. Right? The God who is love, the God who is mercy, is not a God who brings about hatred. The antidote is mercy. The antidote is forgiveness. And we like Peter, are going, I'm not sure I really want to do that. Right? Because somewhere inside we've believed that if we forgive, then that means I'm putting the anger aside, and that leaves me vulnerable to attack. That takes away my strong defense. That's not true. That's a lie. Right? The truth is that forgiveness isn't about you and that person who hurt you. It's about you dealing with your own stuff. And we are always called to forgive. We're not always called to be reconciled to another person. If somebody is kind of abusive, exploitative, negligent person in a relationship of whatever sort, you might not be called to reconcile with that person right away, or maybe ever. That's for you and God to decide together. But we are always called to forgive, which means this. It means simply this: dealing with my anger and sorting it out so that it doesn't live inside. It means bringing my anger to prayer and going, God, I'm drilled into the ceiling about this thing. And then praying through it with Him. It means as often as I feel the hurt, the anger, the disappointment, the whatever that came from whatever happened between me and somebody else, that as often as those feelings come up to the surface again, that I go, yep, I remember these, and I choose to forgive again. Forgiveness is a process, y'all. When we were little kids and someone cut us in line, it was as simple as saying, hey, you cut me in line, I don't like that. And go, oh, I'm sorry. And you go, I forgive you. And they go to the end of the line. And it's like everything's whole in an instant. Well, that's not the real world anymore, is it? Now when you get hurt by somebody, it's usually a bit more serious than that. And it's got some staying power. And people aren't just made whole like that. But how can you expect, Sirach says, to come to the Lord for healing if you're nourishing anger? We have to be willing to stop nourishing the anger and to let it go. And then when those feelings come up, we say, Lord, give me the grace that I need right now to forgive again. Because it's a process. And so from the very beginning, I go, oh, I'm feeling the hurt. Okay, well, I'm going to choose to forgive just for right now. And I'm one step closer to the finish line of that process. And tomorrow, I choose to forgive again. And next week, and next month, and next year, I choose to forgive whenever it comes up. For some of your wounds, for some of the things, some of the bad things that have happened to you in your life, it'll mean a process that's going to last you for the rest of your life. It's like when you talk to an alcoholic about their recovery, they're in recovery for the rest of their life. They may have been sober for 40 years. And you know what? They'll say, I'm an alcoholic. I'm in recovery. I'm working my program. Right? They don't rest on their laurels and say, I've been healed, even though there's been a lot of healing in their life. Some things are smaller than that, and they'll be completely forgiven in a relatively short process. The antidote is mercy. Forgiveness is that peace that goes on between me and God, and when I've gotten far enough along in that process and I'm continuing to do it with the Lord, He might call me to reconcile with the person. Often He might. And then I go to the person and I say, hey, this is what's been happening. This is where I've been feeling hurt. This is how I'm feeling neglected. This is what disappointed me. This is what made me angry, or it made me want to whatever. But I've been working on this process of forgiveness. I want you to know that I still want to patch things up. I still want this to work out. I think that we can get over this hurdle and be better than we were before. But that doesn't happen without forgiveness first. Always called to forgive, or sometimes called to reconcile, maybe even often. But there's only one opening in the heart when it comes to mercy. And it's through that same singular portal that mercy is let in, that we let mercy out. And the size of that opening that we have to receive mercy from God really kind of needs to be this big. But if we're only letting mercy out in little portions like this, then that's about all we have to receive from God with. And it becomes very narrow, and the opening becomes small. And if the heart is hardened because anger has been nourished and grown strong and invaded, then we're not going to have a lot of recompense before the Lord, because we're going to be like the servant who received mercy but then was merciless with our brothers and sisters. There's only one opening in the heart for mercy, and it will be determined. Its breadth, its wideness to receive will be determined on how generous you are with mercy with others. The scriptures today tell us to stop hating each other, to stop sinning, and to stop being judgmental. They tell us to remember that we too are going to die one day, which is kind of an allusion to you're going to face that judge, and he's going to ask you how merciful you were with other people. It tells us to remember the direction that God has given us and his many lessons throughout this life and throughout the scriptures. It's going to ask us to remember God's promise, his covenant. The call to forgive 7 times, 77 times, is a recipe for joy. It's the antidote to invasive anger, and it's God's promise for freedom.